CNN host Fareed Zakaria yesterday on the Constitution, Hat Tip Media Research Center. You're going to want to listen to this. Cut 10, go.
And let me be very clear here. The U.S. Constitution is an extraordinary work, one of the greatest expressions of liberty and law in human history. One amazing testament to it is the mere fact that it has survived as the law of the land for 222 years. But our Constitution has been revised 27 times, some of these revisions being enormous and important, such as the abolition of slavery. Then there are areas that have evolved. For example, the power of the judiciary, especially the Supreme Court, is barely mentioned in the document. This grew as a fact over history. But there are surely some issues that still need to be debated and fixed. The Electoral College, for example, is highly undemocratic, allowing for the possibility that someone could get elected as president even if he or she had a smaller share of the total national vote than his opponent. The structure of the Senate is even more undemocratic, with Wisconsin's 6 million inhabitants getting the same representation in the Senate as California's 36 million people. That's not exactly one man, one vote. And we are surely the only modern nation that could be paralyzed, as we were in 2000, over an election dispute because we lack a simple national electoral system. So we could use the ideas of social media that were actually invented in this country to suggest a set of amendments to modernize the Constitution for the 21st century. Such a plan is not unheard of in American history. After all, the delegates in Philadelphia in 1787 initially met not to create the Constitution as we now know it, but instead to revise the existing document, the Articles of Confederation. But the delegates saw a disconnect between the document that currently governed them and the needs of the nation, so their solution was to start anew. I'm just suggesting we talk about a few revisions.
No, you're not. The Constitution has already been shredded almost beyond recognition, and you want to finish the job. Let me address some of this. I'm not sure if the gentleman is originally from this country or not, but the founders and the framers of the Constitution did not create a democracy. All you have to do is read Madison's notes, of which I've had a copy for decades, and all of you know who go on my website, you can purchase it on Amazon or in maybe not most bookstores, and you for yourself can see what the framers were debating. They set up a Senate where they wanted the states to have representation. The progressive populist movement of 100 years ago eliminated that with the 17th Amendment, so the states have actually no representation in the federal government anymore. That was crucial to the ratifying states after the Constitution was adopted at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia by the delegates. It was crucial. So the states have no representation. Furthermore, the framers did not want direct elections of presidents. Their biggest concern was that a faction of the population would be able to take over the country through an emotional time or emotional events, and that the changes they would make to the nation would be reckless and yet permanent. And so they created a republic, a constitutional representative republic. The only direct elections were for members of the House of Representatives. Now, one of the reasons for all this also was, if you wanted a lot of government action, you would appeal to your state, or you would appeal to your locality, where you would have much more influence. Now the 10th Amendment is laughed at. The 9th Amendment isn't even considered in the Constitution. The reason they met in Philadelphia and decided to get rid of the Articles of Confederation rather than adjust them was in part because the national government couldn't pay its debt. The war debt. Couldn't pay off the military, couldn't pay off its loans. Was also because we needed a military to defend ourselves. It was also because there were too many currencies. It was also because they wanted to promote commerce. Now, the left wants to change the Constitution to do not those things, but the opposite. Now, one more thing. Fareed Zakaria, born in India. This issue of slavery. The Founding Fathers were well aware of this issue, and many of them objected to it, including some who had slaves. And they knew it was a poison. And they fought about it at the Constitutional Convention. And so the Constitution, if you read it, does not enshrine slavery. The northern states, as well as some of the southern delegates, like George Mason, were able to do, among other things, two things in the Constitution. Number one, end, as a constitutional matter, the importation of slaves by the early 1800s. Two, for purposes of apportionment in the House of Representatives, that is, for the purposes of assigning House members based on population, slaves, which the slave states did not recognize as human beings, were to be counted as 3/5 persons for the purpose of apportionment. This was an initiative pushed by the anti-slave northern states to limit the federal influence and power of the slave states. It was not some affirmation that slaves are property or 3/5 person, as you'll hear day in and day out in classrooms, on television, for your entire life. Moreover, it wasn't the federal government that started the abolition movement. It was citizens who started the abolition movement. And it was the northern states, in particular Pennsylvania and so forth, that promoted the abolition movement. So when people say, oh, states' rights, you're for states' rights. Well, some states led the way to abolish slavery while the federal government did nothing. As a matter of fact, the federal government passed the Fugitive Slave Acts, 2 of them, which held that if slaves escaped to the north, that the northern states had a duty as a matter of federal statute to return them to the south. Well, the northern states resisted. This is before there was a civil war, obviously. And we come full circle, which is the reason I set up the program this way today, where we were talking about under God, remember? We were talking about the Declaration of Independence, remember? We were talking about God-given natural unalienable rights, remember that? Unalienable rights come from a higher authority than man. So man cannot take them away legitimately. And those unalienable rights belong to black men and black women and black children, whether you call them slaves or anything else. You don't have to believe me. It was Abraham Lincoln who made this argument, pointing to the Declaration of Independence. God-given natural unalienable rights. Under God, he said, which no man can take away and no man can grant because they've already been granted as a matter of birthright. That is why we resist efforts in our society and our culture to resist our founding documents. They are not the enemy. They secure what liberty we have left when properly comprehended and executed. What is it then that Fareed Zakaria of CNN and the others, because there's millions of people who think like this, including those who currently serve in the White House and many on the courts, what is it then that they seek? They seek to overcome every last obstacle to their authority to remake this society. And notice one other thing. For them, it's always about economics. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, private property rights are crucial. If by your labor you accumulate assets, you purchase a home, a car, you put aside money for a rainy day or for a pension or whatever you do, that belongs to you. Your labor represents your liberty. Slaves, their labor was owned by somebody else. So there are legitimate justifications for the government to take a certain percentage of your labor to secure the society, to do that which the Constitution permits and nothing more. But beyond that, it is stealing your labor. It is stealing your your finite time on this earth to put it to a different use. So let's say you have to pay 50%, just as a round-off figure, of your income to the federal government, for whatever the reason. That means you are spending 50% of your working lifetime, of your finite time on this earth, perhaps 20%, working for someone or something else. That's why it is so unconscionable when you hear politicians blithely speak about spreading the wealth, about taking somebody else's labor and giving it to somebody else or applying it to what they think. They are substituting their own selfish political decisions for your own. For your own. And what Mr. Fareed Zakaria and all the others, and this goes on in our law schools, it goes on in our colleges and universities, this goes on in the ivory towers in government, in the Oval Office and Congress, what they want is to abolish the few obstacles that are left that the framers of the Constitution put in place to protect you. To protect you. Had they wanted, after the Revolutionary War, to empower themselves, they probably could have. Had George Washington wanted to be king, he probably could have. What's so remarkable about what took place in Philadelphia is what they didn't do, even more than what they did do. How many countries can you point to where 55 men met in a hall could have remade their society in 1,000 different ways and yet remain faithful to the Declaration of Independence and the right of the individual, who fought with each other, fought like hell, not to empower themselves, but to protect your God-given unalienable rights. That's what they did in that hot summer in Constitutional Hall, which was the Pennsylvania Assembly Building in Philadelphia. That's what they did for 5.5 months. And a handful of the delegates still voted no. They refused to sign it, including George Mason. George Mason, the author of the Virginia Declaration of Rights, insisted that it was not good enough, that we needed a Declaration of Rights to underscore and put an exclamation mark behind the fact that this was not going to be a federal tyranny, a runaway central government, which is what they had always feared. And so they agreed that if the Constitution was adopted, that they would submit these amendments to the states. And that's how we got our Bill of Rights. They were originally 12 amendments. They adopted 10. We've only had 27 amendments. So only 17 amendments since the adoption of the Bill of Rights. For all this talk about changing the Constitution, what amazes me is they've all but destroyed it already. And without amending it through the amendment process. Through decree. Whether decree of the Supreme Court or decree of another branch. And one other thing. When did it become true that your judicial system is wiser and better than the other branches or than you making your own decisions? I want to remind you, and I wrote a book on this, Men in Black, that the Supreme Court authored some of the worst opinions and inhumane opinions you can possibly imagine. The Dred Scott decision, which led to the Civil War. Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal as equal. Even though a railroad company was defying state law and wanted to integrate. And what about the Japanese internment camps, Korematsu? They upheld those too. And there's others. Let us not fool ourselves just because the rulers and their sycophants wish you to be fooled. That the concentration of power and judgment and wisdom, so-called, is best for you. I'll stick with the founders. You can stick with this new breed of leftist who keeps demanding that you surrender more and more of your liberty, more and more of your property, more and more of your decision-making to them. They don't believe they have enough yet. They want more power. It's not enough that they can reach into your home and change your light bulb. It's not enough that they can reach into your home and decide how to flush your toilet. It's not enough that they reach into your pantry, that they reach into your automobile, into your kid's school. It's not enough. They need more power. Because although you are supposedly wise enough, as I said before, to choose your rulers, you're apparently not wise enough to choose your light bulbs. I have that about right, Mr. Fareed Zakaria and all you other leftists? I think I do.